Yeah. It was Abraham. And his son was Isaac. Okay, Isaac. Yeah. So the one thing, so again, it's the ego, the attention that really is the battle. The Gita is saying that even in what appears to be the most, quote, unspiritual, one can act with pure intentions and thus be guided by Krishna consciousness. This consciousness itself will impose the most strict limitations on one's use of violence, because that use will not be directed by one's own selfish interests, still less by cruelty, sadism, and mere bloodlust. So this is such an important point that we try to make over and over again. That this misuse of violence is only possible in a context where the individual is not freed from their selfish egoism, which produces cruelty, sadism, and bloodlust. So Krishna is first of all asking Arjuna, win that fight, win the battle against that selfishness. Then you become qualified to go out and fight an external battlefield. What I'm asking you to do, this holy war. So we have to ask that question. Everyone who poses that, this is a war, a just war. It has to happen on behalf of God, on behalf of the God-fearing nation. Are the individuals being asked to go out and fight that war? Are they first of all being asked to fight this internal war, to become as qualified as Arjuna is? He goes on. The discoveries of Freud and others in modern times have, of course, alerted us to the fact that there are certain imperatives of culture and of conscience which appear pure on the surface, are in fact bestial in their roots. The greatest inhumanities have been perpetrated in the name of humanity, civilization, progress, freedom, my country, and of course, God. This reminds us that in the cultivation of the inner spiritual consciousness, there is a perpetual danger of self-deception, narcissism, self-righteous evasion of truth. This is really so perceptive. In other words, the standard temptation of religious and spiritually minded people is to cultivate an inner sense of rightness or peace, like Krishna says in the Gita, sattva guna, mode of goodness, peace with the natural happiness, and then what happens? One becomes at the very least complacent, and not wanting to go farther. But it can get much worse than that, which is what he's pointing out here. That, in other words, the standard temptation of religious and spiritually minded people is to cultivate an inner sense of rightness or of peace, and make the subjective feeling the final test of everything. As long as this feeling of rightness remains with them, they will do anything under the sun. But this inner feeling, as Auschwitz and the Eichmann caves have shown, can coexist with the ultimate in human corruption. The hazard of the spiritual quest is, of course, that its genuineness cannot be left to our own isolated subjective judgment alone. How many people I meet on the college campus every day who are like that, burnt out of organized religion, institutionalized religion, and saying, I'm doing it on my own. I'm just figuring it out and connecting on my own. So he's warning us against this too. It can also be a pitfall. The fact that I am turned on doesn't prove anything, whatever. Nor does the fact that I am turned on. We do not simply create our own lives on our own terms. Any attempt to do so is ultimately an affirmation of our individual self as ultimate and supreme. And how many people who try to pursue that spiritual path on their own, how many of them actually end up experiencing this communion with a person of God? Practically none. It always ends, almost always, 99% of the time, ends up to a bloated conception of self-worth instead of the feeling the incredible humility that results when the small soul actually communes with the all-pervasive Supreme Soul. This is self-idolatry, which is diametrically opposed to, quote, Krishna consciousness, or to any other authentic form of religious or metaphysical consciousness. The Gita sees that the basic problem of man is his endemic refusal to live by a will other than his own. For in striving to live entirely by his own individual will, instead of becoming free, man is enslaved by forces even more exterior and more delusory than his own transient fancies. He projects himself out of the present into the future. He tries to make for himself a future that accords with his own fantasy, and thereby escape from the present reality, which he does not fully accept. So this Krishna is really hammering onto Arjuna. Accept this reality, present reality that he's in. And yet, when he moves into the future, he wanted to create for himself, it becomes a present that is once again repugnant to him. And yet this is precisely what he has, quote, made for himself. It is his own karma. I mean, this is amazing. We can discuss this essay for a month. So just imagine, this is just a short introduction to the Bhagavad Gita as it is. So imagine, what is the wisdom in the Bhagavad Gita, right? And this is what his analysis, his reading of that book has spawned this essay. So just imagine what that book is like. So now he closes there. In accepting the present in all its reality is something to be dealt with precisely as it is. Man comes to grips at once with his karma and with a providential will, which ultimately is more his own than what he currently experiences on a superficial level as, quote, his own will. Well, every time a new event comes in, I have to go back to the beginning and explain where we're at, right? So basically what he's saying here is there's this fierce sense of individuality we have in the West, especially in America. In America, it's very may not be actually what we think it is, that we're acting according to our own will. And Krishna says so. Actually, a mind which is not controlled is dragged by the senses to objects of the senses which are created by minds of others to satisfy the bodies of those minds, those persons. So we're not really in control of things at all. As long as we have to run after all those different things out there that we're being brainwashed to think we need to be part of the crowd, part of the group, to be with it, you know, to be civilized, be worth it. It is in surrendering a false and illusory liberty on a superficial level that man unites himself with the inner ground of reality and freedom in himself, which is the will of God, of Krishna, of Providence, of Tao. Wow. So the kids are all here for their presentation. Just give me another 2 minutes, please. And I'll try to be very, very quiet, okay?